Hey everyone, Robert Faringo of Doc Sports here with your next episode of What Are the Odds? Unfortunately, my compatriot Rafael Esparza couldn't make it this week, but that's fine because we all know that I carry the show every week anyway, so we should be all right. Before I get to the breakdown of the lines in college football and the NFL that jumped out at me, I want to mention down in the description, click on that free 60 link that will take you over to Doc Sports main website, take you over to the mothership, and it will give you $60 free to be used basically for whatever you want at Docs. You can use it for any package, any handicapper in any sport that you want. So not just football. If you want football picks, it works out perfectly because our top games each week are $30 a piece. So that free $60 will entitle you to 2 free picks. For instance, this weekend, Doc Sports has their world famous Big Ten Game of the Year going on Saturday. You could get that and another free top game from one of the other handicappers. Also, college basketball is starting on Monday. I'm going to have a couple videos on Monday talking college basketball. Very excited about that. You could use that free $60 towards a weekly or monthly package there. So it's free money. So make sure that you're taking advantage of it. So, okay, getting into this week. Most of the lines that jumped out at me are in the NFL, which is a little odd. You don't see the same level of variance on the spreads in pro football that you do in college football. So I don't have a lot of college games to break down. There weren't a ton that jumped out at me this week. There were some that we could talk about that we're not going to, like Central Florida is almost a touchdown favorite yet again, even though the sports books have been completely wrong about them the entire season. But I'm going to get it started with Minnesota at Illinois. Okay. Minnesota favored in this game on the road by 3 points. Rare that you see small road favorites in the Big Ten. There's a lot of deference given to home field advantage in the Big Ten, especially between those middling teams, right? Not a surprise that Ohio State is favored over Penn State, for instance, even though Ohio State is playing in Happy Valley because the Buckeyes have gotten so much hype this year. But this one jumped out at me because Illinois is the team that's favored here. They're kind of hanging around in the top 25 at number 24. So you would think sometimes that number next to the name is worth a few points to the odds makers just because they know that the general betting public is going to look at that and see, ooh, the top 25 team. They must be really good. I'm going to bet on them. So this spread actually opened with Illinois as a 1.5 point favorite, which I still would have thought would be a little bit light. But this number has swung to the point where Minnesota is laying that field goal on the road. Now, I understand that Minnesota has been playing very well. They have some steam. They've won 3 straight games. They're 4-0 against the spread in their last 4 games. They had that close loss to Michigan before they reeled off 3 straight wins. They're 8-1 against the spread over their last 9. So they have been a really solid team. Their only losses have come to Michigan and to Iowa. Really no shame there, right? They had that opening week loss against North Carolina, but I guarantee you if Minnesota played North Carolina at home right now, they would smash the Tar Heels. But, a loss is a loss. Now, as good as Minnesota has been, Illinois has been pretty much just as good. I mean, they're 6-2 straight up and against the spread in their last 8 games. They actually beat Michigan. They beat Kansas. They beat Nebraska. Their only losses are to Penn State and Oregon State. So I feel like Illinois has the home field advantage and they have the better resume. So what's the deal here? That's what I'm not quite getting. That's why this number kind of jumped out at me. Now, I understand that Illinois is coming off a really ugly loss last week in Oregon. Not only did they get blown out in Outson, they suffered a lot of injuries. They had 6 players leave that game, all of whom are starters. Pat Bryant, their best wide receiver, left that game with an injury. It was a head injury, got a concussion, really bad no call. The guy for Oregon probably should have been kicked out of the game for targeting. Not only was he not kicked out, there was no flag. However, a couple of guys are supposed to be coming back from injury for Illinois, and Bryant is allegedly going to be cleared later in the week. So that's kind of one of those injuries that you should take an eye on. We're recording this on Wednesday. Wait till Friday. Check and see what Bryant's status is. He is a difference maker. But if you're unfamiliar, my stance on injuries in college football is that of all of the sports, NBA, NHL, baseball, pick a sport, I think that injuries have the least impact in college football. Okay. First of all, you look at any given college football game, any one team is probably putting 45 guys on the field, talking offense, defense, special teams, backups, specialty packages. 45, 50 guys are going to play for one team in any given college football game. So if 2 or 3 of those guys get hurt, doesn't really have the same impact that it would, say, an NBA team losing, 2 or 3 starters, or an NFL team losing 3 or 4 defensive starters. So I think that injuries can be overvalued in handicapping and college football. And again, that's why I kind of don't understand this line from Illinois' perspective going into this game. On the other hand, it's a red flag, right? The fact that the road team, that the unranked team, that the team that we expect to be the underdog is such a firm favorite. That's one of those ones that's going to give me a little bit of pause. And, I'm not sure if this one's going to end up on my card, but that was the number one college football line that jumped out at me. Speaking of Oregon, probably the other college football number that gave me the most pause this week was Oregon at Michigan. Now, Oregon is the number one team in the country, and as such, they're going to pay that number one in the country tax. You see this whether it's in college basketball or college football, that top team, that team that won next to their name, they're going to pay the tax on that. Their numbers are going to be inflated a little bit more for the same reason. Sportsbooks know that the general public overestimate the abilities of teams ranked in the top 10. Okay. And I feel like that's kind of the case here. 16 points. Oregon is laying out 16 points in the Big House this weekend in Michigan. Preseason, this number was probably closer to a pick, maybe Michigan -3, something like that. So this is a wild swing based on the results of this season. And I understand it. Michigan has not been very good. That was kind of predictable, right? You lose Harbaugh, you lose some of their assistant coaches, you lose their starting quarterback, star running back, starters on both sides of the ball. Michigan was always going to take a step back this year. So it's really not that surprising that they have. They're only 2-6 against the spread, but they're not some loser team. They still have some guys on the defensive side of the ball that will probably be playing in the NFL someday. You take Oregon, who has been so hot, but has also been benefiting from playing a lot of home games in their kind of unique home field situation. You're now bringing them across the country to a place that they are not familiar with that baggage, and it can be baggage of being the number one team in the country. This just seems like a monster number here. I understand that Oregon's 8-0 and undefeated on the year, 3-0 against the spread in their last 3 weeks, including that win over Ohio State where they were an underdog. And Michigan's been kind of a spotty underdog this year. They lost as an underdog at Washington. They lost at home to Texas as an underdog earlier in the year. They beat USC at home as an underdog, a false underdog, which I think we'd all agree now that Michigan never should have been the underdog in that game, but they did beat USC. This also feels like kind of an Alamo game for Michigan. Like they're going to rally. We're going to see their best effort in this game. Their hopes of making it to the playoffs are pretty much gone, but this is still kind of a season-defining win for a team that has a lot of pride. They're the defending national champions, right? I think it'll be odd if Oregon just walks into Ann Arbor and wipes the floor with the Wolverines. This number just seems a little bit inflated to me. I think I had this one closer to 10.5. So that's a lot of value there with Michigan if you have the stones to pull the trigger. And again, that's not to say Oregon can't blow out Michigan. I've been betting against Michigan. Anyone that follows my service knows I have been hard against Michigan so far this year, but I feel like we're at that tipping point where the value might now be going the other way. They only lost by 19 points at home to Texas. That's a Longhorns team that has comparable talent, I feel like, to Oregon. So let's just say I'd be more surprised if Oregon comes in and wins by 3 or 4 touchdowns than I would if Michigan gives them a game. So those were the two college games that jumped out at me. Transitioning into the NFL, we have 4 games we're going to talk about. The first is that Thursday nighter where we have Houston at the New York Jets. And the Jets, they're almost like the NFL version of Central Florida, right? Where the sportsbooks have just been, the media, and the general public have just been so wrong about the Jets all year. They are such colossal losers. And it's like people just can't wrap their mind around it. And I'll admit, even I got sucked in last week. Okay. I bet on them against New England. Now, that was more about how bad I think that Patriots team is. I think they're one of the 3 or 4 worst rosters and worst teams in the NFL, but it doesn't matter. The Jets didn't only not cover that touchdown spread that they were laying at New England. They lost the game outright. Okay. Like, the Jets have been awful. They're 0-3 since they fired Robert Saleh, which was, I think everyone will agree now, was just a horrendous move by a terrible owner, one of the worst owners in professional sports, Woody Johnson, a guy who was just a loser in all facets of life, if we're being completely honest. But here we are with the Jets favored over Houston. Houston, I have them in the top 10 of my NFL power rankings. They are, ahead in their division, made the playoffs last year, look on pace to make the playoffs this year. Supposed to be a young, up-and-coming threat to Kansas City in the AFC. So why are they underdogs against this Jets team that kind of can't get out of its own way? Now, I understand Stephon Diggs blew out his knee. He's out for the year. Big blow to a Houston offense that's already been dealing with a few injuries. But you got to ask yourself, who do you trust more in this game? That Jets defense is not what it once was. Since they fired Robert Saleh, defensive head coach, they elevate their defensive coordinator to head coach. Your 2 best defensive minds are either gone or their attentions are split now. And you can see the difference with the Jets on that side of the ball. They haven't dropped from being, top 5, top 10 to middle of the pack. They've been bad. They've been really bad. They've given up 110 points over the last 4 weeks. They've been getting torched on that side of the ball. This is a Houston offense that's been a little bit up and down, due in part to some of those injuries, but they can still run the ball. Joe Mixon has been fantastic when he has been healthy, and he is healthy. They still have a good scheme. They still have the better quarterback right now. Right now, CJ Stroud is better than Aaron Rodgers. He has been all season. That's not, some wild opinion or hot take. That is a mathematical fact if you look at the production of these 2 players. Now, Houston did get routed 30-6 last December 23rd against the same Jets team. But as we're pointing out, this really isn't the same Jets team. And the thing that jumped out about this number was not only that the Jets were favored, okay, and I wrote about this last week in my NFL Power Rankings, come out every Tuesday, is that the Jets were 1-point home favorites in this game prior to last week's results. And I was really interested to see what Sunday was going to do to the number. Well, Houston wins. They beat Indianapolis. The Jets take a humiliating loss and lose Stephon Diggs. And that number moves from the Jets -1 to -2.5. So you got to ask yourself, is this still a wave of denial that people just cannot wrap their brains around the fact that Aaron Rodgers and the Jets are this bad? And so it's just kind of that stubborn betting, doubling down, chasing on this Jets team because, one of these weeks they're going to cover the spread, right? One of these weeks they're not going to be colossal losers, even though that's all we've seen from them over the last month and a half. Or is this kind of an indicator that Houston is a team that's taking on water and maybe they are a little bit overinflated when you're talking about the hierarchy in the AFC? So that's going to be an interesting dilemma to see play out on Thursday, and I advise everyone to proceed with caution, no matter which side that you're on in this one. All right, next game that jumped out of the board at me, and honestly, this was the first game in the NFL that jumped out. This was the one that I was most surprised by, and it's the 2 worst teams in the NFL, and I think undeniably the 2 worst teams in the NFL. We have New Orleans at Carolina. New Orleans is a 7-point favorite on the road at Carolina. The Saints basically have a CFL or USFL caliber roster right now that they're bringing into the game. They have one of the worst coaches in all of football in Dennis Allen. And it isn't 100% Allen and the Saints' fault for what's happened to their roster. Injuries. Injuries have just crushed this team. Since week one, they've been leaking oil on that front. And then the last 3 weeks, they have just lost so many guys. Their receiving core decimated, offensive line decimated, losing 3 defensive starters. And we've seen it the last 2 weeks when they've just gotten run over, really, and have been non-competitive in their games. I have them as the second worst team in the NFL right now. Now, Derek Carr is projected to come back this week. That's obviously a massive upgrade from, Haener and Rattler, the 2 young kids that have been pretty bad. But Derek Carr is still going to be without most of his key weapons and still operating behind that offensive line. So I really feel like he's going to, and he hasn't played in a few weeks. So I really wonder about what his effectiveness is going to be. And I really wonder if he's worth, the 3 or 4 points on the number that he seems to be giving to the Saints. I mean, that's just the reality. Forget about Carolina and all their issues. Should the Saints be favored against anyone in the NFL right now? That's question number 1. Should they be favored at all against anyone? Anyway. I don't believe that they should be. Should they be favored by a touchdown against anyone in the NFL right now? Obviously not. Should they be favored on the road against anyone right now? Probably not. So this one is just screaming for Carolina money. And I got to tell you, they might get me to bite, as bad as Carolina has been. And make no mistake, this Panthers team is heading for historically bad. All right, they're 7-19 against the spread dating back to the start of last season. Their last 9 losses have been by an average score of 34-10. So they've lost their last 9 games by an average of 24 points a game. They did have the 1 win against the Raiders mixed in there, but their last 9 losses, 24 points per game. Their point differential on the year is negative 18.4. That is on par to be the worst in the NFL since the turn of the century. Again, they won 2 games last year. They're worse this year. We are talking about, if they continue on this pace, like historically bad 2-year run. Like that time when the Browns, they went winless the 1 year and won 1 game the year before that, I believe. It was something like that. That's how bad this Carolina team is. All that being said, I still do not know if Carolina should be getting a touchdown at home, division rival, against a team that's dealing with just as many issues as they have. Now, slight fly in the ointment here is Carolina did trade Deontay Johnson this week to Baltimore. Deontay Johnson has made next to no impact on this team. He's been banged up. Hasn't been that good when he's played. They overpaid for the guy anyway. So the Deontay Johnson trade worries me a little bit, not because, they're missing this stud receiver. They're not. He doesn't make a big impact on their offensive game. It's that trades in the NFL, what do they do to the locker room? Okay, it's obvious they're waving the white flag. It's obvious the season is over. You got a rookie head coach. Is he going to be able to rally these guys to continue to play? This team that's been getting its teeth kicked in every week. Is he going to be able to rally them that, hey, this is a winnable game. Hey, this is a division rival. Hey, we're at home. We're professionals. All that stuff, and get them to come to play when the front office is already looking forward to next year. So that trade gave me a little bit of pause on this one, but New Orleans shouldn't be favored against anybody. And this is almost one of those situations where even if I bet on or take Carolina, I almost hope New Orleans wins and covers, because that might convince the sportsbooks and the public for next week that, hey, maybe these guys aren't that bad. Maybe Derek Carr is that difference maker. And we will continue to clean up betting against this Saints team like we have the last few weeks. So, all right, next game that we're going to talk about is Denver at Baltimore. Big number. 9.5. Baltimore coming off a loss, facing a Denver team with a winning record, a lot of momentum. They're 5-1, straight up and against the spread in their last 6 games, coming off a convincing win, 2-touchdown win last week. Sean Payton really turning things around. Bo Nix really playing well. Denver is a team that's starting to believe a little bit. have that momentum going into Baltimore, facing a Ravens team that's coming off a really sloppy loss. There's no other word to describe it, really. That game was less about what Cleveland did to win that game and more about what Baltimore did to give that game away, missing field goals, dropping interceptions, dropping key passes for big plays and on third down, some secondary breakdowns. But that's what kind of worries me a little bit about this Ravens team is that, yes, they're in a bounce back mode, and yes, they can go rip shit riot on teams that come into the harbor, into Baltimore. The problem is defensively, this Ravens team is not up to par compared to what we've seen from them for, let's say, the last 20 years. Really, they're bad. They are a bad defensive team. They have 5 wins. Only 2 of them have been by 10 points or more. And those wins, you know, the Buffalo blowout was in prime time. They were up for that. The other one was Tampa Bay, a Tampa Bay team that Denver went on the road and hammered, really beat them 26-7. That's a worse beating than what Baltimore gave them. And it was on the road. And it was when Tampa Bay was healthy. They had Mike Evans. They had Chris Godwin back then. Really impressive. Probably the most impressive performance that Denver has put together to date. So you have to ask yourself, is this too many points? All right. We've kind of seen the thing fall apart where underdogs of 7 points or more in the NFL were automatic plays the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season. That's kind of dissipated a little bit as we've seen the haves and have-nots in this league. But this one seems a little bit thick, right? And the public is buying into the Broncos. 2/3 of the early week betting, 66% of the bets in this game have come in on Denver. But what's also stood out to me is that number is still climbing. You know, Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, I saw some books go to 10, and then that number was quickly bet down to 9.5. I wouldn't be surprised to see some 10s out there by Sunday morning. So what do we do with this? Is Baltimore still that team? Are they still a top 5 team that can just lay the wood to a team not of comparable talent, but both of these teams are on track to make the playoffs? And can they beat another playoff team by that much? How scrappy, how good is this Denver team? They're kind of like the Bears, a team we're going to talk about in a second, that they've been beating up on bad teams, covering the spread against bad teams. This is the first top-tier team that Denver has played in a minute. How are they going to do in that matchup? So the final game we're going to talk about is the Chicago Bears going on the road at Arizona. I'm not going to rehash everything because a lot of people have already talked about what happened with Chicago and Washington and the Hail Mary and all that. One of the most egregious coaching meltdowns I've ever seen. I don't know if any of you have watched The Comeback on Netflix, the 3-part documentary that dropped this week about the Boston Red Sox 2004 comeback from down 3-0 against the New York Yankees. The year before that record-breaking, amazing comeback, the Red Sox were playing the Yankees in the ALCS, and Grady Little had one of the biggest managerial coaching meltdowns in sports history with Pedro Martinez. Not gonna ruin it for anyone that doesn't know the story or anyone who wants to relive that, but it's really good. Check that documentary out. But that's all I could think about watching that documentary and thinking about Matt Eberflus. And Grady Little was fired immediately after that series. He was canned. Matt Eberflus wasn't. How is that going to carry over? What happened with Tyreek Stevenson? What happened with Eberflus? The way everyone's handled that. The fact that they let that game get away in such just gut-wrenching fashion. You know, I'm not going to go back and rehash it, but you have to know that the players and coaches, that's staying with them this week. This is how you hear that phrase in sports all the time. Don't let one loss become 2. This is how it happens. When you lose a game like that, in that fashion, and now the next week you're back on the road facing a competent Arizona team, what's that going to do to Chicago? How sharp are they going to be? All right, this is a Bears offense that didn't play very well last week against Washington, facing a very vulnerable Arizona defense this week. The Washington team that the Bears should have just beaten on the road went into Arizona and just freight trained the Cardinals. Okay. Now you can't always do that modus tollens thing with NFL teams, but it is indicative that Chicago probably has more talent and probably is the better team. They have the better record, but they are underdogs in this game. That wasn't super surprising to me, considering that the Bears have not won on the road yet this year. They're 0-3 against teams on the road. The Bears have played a really, really soft schedule. They haven't beaten anyone a caliber of the teams that Arizona has beaten when they beat the 49ers. So not surprising to me that Arizona was favored in this game, -1 favored by a half a point, depending on it. What is surprising to me is that this number is shifting the other way. The money is bringing the spread back to Chicago. I see this game as a pick kind of across the board this whole week. So it is kind of a toss-up game, and Arizona is a flaky team, right? I think they're the only team in the NFL this year that has both won a game and lost a game by 30 or more points. Okay, that's the spread you get when you're trying to handicap the Cardinals each week. Which team is going to show up? All that said, I just don't see how that loss last week doesn't linger for Chicago and doesn't spill over into their preparation for this game. And the fact that the number is giving the Bears the benefit of the doubt based on their talent, their hype, their following, their popularity, all of that is a little bit surprising to me. So I'm really, really interested on how that game is going to turn out. So, all right, so that's it. Those are the games that jumped out at me this week that I really wanted to dig in on and break down with you. Hopefully I gave some of you some insight, maybe change your opinion or help you make up your mind, either which side you want to go to or whether or not to stay away some of these games. But I'm really going to be interested in how all 6 of those games play out. Before you get out of here, let's give you a free pick. I know you came for something else other than that free 60 and my analysis. And this time we're going into college football, and we're taking Arkansas. Arkansas +7 at home against Ole Miss. I still think that Ole Miss is a little bit overhyped, a little bit overvalued, because really when you break down Ole Miss's season, they were top 10 coming into the season, dark horse national championship team, really haven't lived up to the hype, have they? I mean, their best win came against South Carolina. That was really it. Arkansas has been playing well. They're 4-1 against the spread in their last 5 games, building a little bit of momentum. You got that coaching staff that really has been coaching this entire season for their jobs, have some close losses, so their record could be even better than it is. Arkansas is 9-1 against the spread against Ole Miss over the last decade. Again, the fact that we're getting the points, the fact that we have the home team, the fact that the home team is motivated, get to that bowl game, try and get to 8 or 9 wins, try and save some people's jobs. A lot of athleticism. They match up really well, I feel like, with the Rebels. Are the Rebels a better team? Yes. But I got to see it from them on the road before I believe it. I got to see them blow somebody other than South Carolina out. So I'm going to take the points in the SEC with the home dog, Arkansas. So, all right, that's it. Raphael should be back next week for those of you that have missed him. Until then, carpe diem and good luck.